everybody, welcome to the final day of Core Set 2020 set reviews here on the Leek. I'm John, as always. We're going to be taking a look at all of the gold cards, the artifact cards, and the land cards. There's a lot of them, but they're all basically the same, so it's going to go pretty quick. Anyways, remember, this is a limited set review. These are my opinions only, and I want you guys to discuss with me and with each other down in the comments below. But without further ado, let's start with the first gold card, which is Corpse Knight. Corpse Knight is white-black for a creature zombie knight at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So the black-white draft theme, the black-white-green draft theme, they have these 3-color draft themes. I'll talk about this when we get to the lands. I don't think this is not a 3-color set, despite what they're saying. Remember, yes, all of the dual lands are in this, and Evolving Wilds is in this, but as I'll talk about when we get there, they're appearing at the same rate as they appeared in M19. They replace your basic land sometimes. And M19 was sure as heck not a 3-color draft format. So anyways, black-white is sort of go wide. There is that minor life gain theme going on. There's not enough payoffs for it to actually be a life gain deck. There's the 1 at uncommon and the 1 at common. The other quote-unquote payoffs are an angel that you'll have 1 copy of, gets 2 extra power. It's not really a theme. But yeah, Corpse Knight is fine. It's a 2/2 that you'll play if you're in black and white. I don't think you're really splashing this. Perhaps if you're green-white, go wide as well. Maybe this is fine, because if you are playing a whole bunch of creatures, getting that extra point of damage is going to be nice. But here's the rub. If you're getting a whole bunch of creatures down, you're probably winning anyway. So this card isn't insane. It's just totally playable if you are these colors. It's like a C+, but it's no higher. This doesn't draw me into that color combination. So just a C+ for Corpse Knight. Up next is Creeping Trailblazer. Creeping Trailblazer is red-green for a creature elemental at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Other elementals you control get +1/+0. 2 red-green. Creeping Trailblazer gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each elemental you control. Red-green is obviously the elemental colors. Blue is the 3rd color in that draft theme. But I think red-green is where it's going to be really at home. And this creature's a great creature for that deck. If you have a ton of elementals, giving them all +1/+0 is going to be huge. And this creature by itself, again, it's 2/2 for 2, so it's completely playable, generally. That old adage of a bear is always playable is slightly starting to go away. And if you're paying 2 red-green to give this +1/+1, because it does count itself, it's not great, but if you're giving it +2/+2, well, we're starting to talk. And by the time we're doing +3/+3, you are easily getting what you're paying for with this activated ability. So if you're in red-green, you better be in elementals, and you really want to get yourself this. This does make me want to build around these colors. This does make me want to come into those colors. And so this is kind of around a B- for Creeping Trailblazer. Empyrean Eagle is up next. Empyrean Eagle is 1 white-blue for a creature bird spirit at uncommon. It's a 2/3 flyer, and other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. White-blue is obviously the flyer deck. Red is technically in that draft theme, but it's not in it greatly. It's got some cards that'll work, but blue-white is where you want to be for flying. Empyrean Eagle just looks fantastic. It's a 2/3 flyer for 3. I'm already sold on that. I'll already play that fair bit, if not all of the time, and the fact that my other flyers get +1/+1, this is going to be a nightmare to deal with. Really like this card. I think it's just a solid B. I might first pick this and just be, all right, as long as I get the cards, we are blue-white flyers for sure right from the start. So a solid B for Empyrean Eagle. Ironroot Warlord is up next. Ironroot Warlord is 1 green-white for a creature Treefolk Soldier at uncommon. It's a star 5. Its power is equal to the number of creatures that you control. Pay 3 green-white, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. I said green and white were the 2 other go-wide colors, along with black-white. And this is a much better payoff, or a much better role player for that deck. Being able to pay 5 to make a 1/1, sold. Absolutely great, as long as the format is not insanely fast and you can get to turn 5 and start pumping these out. it's going to be huge. This is going to teach players about the value of mana sinks in limited Magic. Something to do with your mana when you're flooding, when you have nothing to cast, when there's nothing relevant to do is great. And this creature is going to be very good. It's going to get bigger for every one that it makes. It's going to help out with everything. Ironroot Warlord looks great. It is a pull into those colors. And if I'm green-white, I absolutely need one of these. Solid B for Ironroot Warlord. And I'll forget forever that this is a 3-drop, because all I'll remember is that it costs 5 to activate. Being a 3-drop is great. Up next is Kaalia, Zenith Seeker. Kaalia is red, white, black for a legendary creature human cleric at Mythic. She's a 3/3 flying vigilance. When Kaalia, Zenith Seeker enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an angel card, a demon card, and or a dragon card from among them. Put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So Mardu's draft theme is aggro. A very hard to grasp theme they went with here. Not that the others are terribly hard, but at least they have mechanics or ideas of what to do, whereas this is just hit 'em fast. Yeah, Kaalia is a 3/3 flying vigilance for 3, which is great, but 3 different pips, you're not casting this on turn 3 the vast majority of the time. She's actually more like a 5 or 6 drop, which is still not the worst thing in the world for a 3/3 flying with vigilance. Now when she ETBs, you get to look at the top 6 cards of your library and reveal an angel, demon, and or dragon and put them all into your hand. That's not actually that great. There are 2 demons in the set and they are rare, which means you are not likely to have them. There are 3 dragons. One is that 7-drop dragon mage that I don't think is any good. One's a rare, and one is rapacious dragon, which is fine, but an uncommon. You can't assume you're going to have that. And for people who happen to be new, when I say things like this, in an average 8-person draft pod, uncommons appear less than 1 per draft. It's around 0.9. So while 9 out of 10 drafts will have 1 uncommon of any specific card that you want, it's very unlikely for you to get 2. It'll happen. It'll absolutely happen. That's how stats works. But on average, you can only expect to see 1, and 1 out of 10 times, there will be none in the pod. They won't exist. Angels are the only ones that you're kind of likely to hit, because there is Dawning Angel at common, and then 2 uncommon angels that are both playable. So all in all, Kaalia's super uninteresting to me. I think she's an obvious commander plant. She's just expensive, hard to cast. I don't think I'd bother splashing for her. I would need to have lucked out like crazy on my rare angels and demons and dragons in order to actually play Kaalia, I think. In order to actually pick her. And the trick is somebody else is going to pick her way before I do. So she's fine. She's like a C+, maybe even a B-, but I just don't think the stars are going to align in the way for her to actually be, you know, a 3-drop that draws you 3 cards. It's just never going to happen. So like a C+ for Kaalia, but realistically I'm never going to play her because I'm never going to have a chance to pick her. Kethis, the Hidden Hand, is up next. Kethis, the Hidden Hand, is white, black, green, the go wide colors. For a legendary creature elf advisor at Mythic, it's a 3/4. Legendary spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard. Until end of turn, each legendary card in your graveyard gains. You may play this card from your graveyard. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This card is so mediocre. It is a vanilla 3/4 for 3. That's about it. With the exception of Chandra, all of the legendary cards in the set are rare or mythic. They will all be most of them will be highly picked by other players. You're just not going to have probably any other legendary along with Kethis. And if you do, you might have 1, which means the second paragraph is absolutely flavor text, even if the first one might once save you a mana. So this is a vanilla 3/4 that's really hard to cast. It's one of those cards that in my grading scale, the way that I rate cards, I want to give an F because I'm never picking it and never playing it. Yes, technically it has power and toughness. Technically you could put it into your 3-color deck that you're playing for some reason. But I'm never, ever, 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 ever doing that. So for me, this card is an F. Up next is Kaikar Wind's Fury. Kaikar Wind's Fury is 1 blue, red, white for a legendary creature bird wizard at Mythic. It's a 3/3 flyer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Sacrifice a spirit, add red. So this is the flying mythic, the flying colors, and I guess it's also tacking on a little bit of Spells Matter, but Spells Matter really doesn't exist in this set like it has in multiple recent sets, it feels. So this is a 3/3 flyer for 4 that when you cast a non-creature spell, which you're going to cast a few, but not a ton, this is limited, you're casting creatures most of the time, you get a 1/1. And then if you need to, you can sack one of those 1/1s, or perhaps another spirit that you have, to make a whole whopping red mana. It's not exciting, but this is a 3/3 flyer, which is a lot better than the card we just talked about, which is a 3/4 nothing. So if I happen to get my hands on this guy, which, again, I don't think I'm ever first picking this card. If the pack's really, really bad, maybe. But if I happen to get my hands on him, or if I see him in pack 2 or pack 3, and I'm already blue or red, blue-white, or red-white, already kind of flying, and I happen to have some fixing that I've picked up, I'll pick this up and I'll play it probably every time. I think it's around a C+, kind of like Kalia almost, except I think Kaikar actually does what this deck wants to do, whereas Kalia doesn't. Kalia's the aggro colors, and she's sort of a 6 or 7 drop because you just can't have perfect mana all the time. So C+ for Kaikar. Lightning Stormkin is up next. Lightning Stormkin is blue-red for a creature elemental wizard at uncommon. It's a 2/2 flying haste. It's fine. It's totally fine. It's a 2/2 flying haste in blue-red, which wants to fly, and I think blue-red is very different than blue-white. Blue-white is play your flyers and hit them, preferably with the Bird Lord. Blue-red's going to be actually the way that I really like to play blue-red, which is tempo aggro. Hasty red things, blue flying things, and bounce, 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 bounce. Or Frostlink freezing, etc. Basically, your plan is hit them, hit them. Oh, they played a creature, bounce it, hit them. They replayed that creature, play a Frostlinks, tap it, hit them, and just do that over and over while sort of denying your opponent the ability to block. And this card's going to go great in it. I think it's a strong C+. I don't think it's a B-. It is just a 2/2 flyer for 2. Like, that's great, but it's not huge. It's just a C+, I think, for a Lightning Stormkin. Moldervine Reclamation is up next. Moldervine Reclamation is 3 black-green for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever a creature you control dies, gain 1 life and draw a card. So this is our last 3-color pair, which is black, green, and blue, which is control with enters the battlefield. Which, I mean, I guess I complained about aggro being too simple. This is a very loose theme. A very, very loose theme. And unfortunately, Moldervine Reclamation is just unplayable garbage. Do not play a 5-mana do-nothing enchantment. This enchantment takes your turn, it takes a card, it takes 5 mana, and in return it gives you nothing. At some point in the future, if a creature you control dies, you gain a life, I don't care, and you draw a card. Cards are great. Cards are not worth 5 mana and a turn for 1 card. Moldervine Reclamation is a hard F. Never, ever, 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 ever play this card. Up next is Ogre Siegebreaker. Ogre Siegebreaker is 2 black-red for a creature Ogre Berserker at uncommon. It's a 4/3. Pay 2 black-red. Destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn. Now this, unlike Kalia, is a little bit more on brand for the black-red aggro deck. 4/3 for 4 is okay-ish. It'll still trade a little bit easily, though, so I'm not going to go crazy with this grade. And I also don't necessarily think that this is often dealing the damage to something that it will then be killing. Its little flunky 2/2 will be dealing the damage, and this will just be sitting back and having a huge threat of activation. Even better if you have some sort of ability to just do like a little bit of chunk damage to a creature and then finish it off with this, turning a shock into 2 black, red, red, kill anything is pretty darn cool. I think this card's really good. I think it absolutely is going to be a star of the black-red deck, and I think you should pick it relatively highly. I've got it at a solid B. Really, really, really like Ogre Siegebreaker. If you happen to somehow be a very controlling black-red deck, this might be a little bit harder to actually play, but as long as you're sort of going wide aggro and hitting them, the threat of activation on this thing is going to be huge. Up next is Omnath, Locus of the Royal. Omnath, Locus of the Royal is 1 green, blue, red for a legendary creature elemental at Mythic. It's a 3/3. When Omnath, Locus of the Royal enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. So it'll always be at least 1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, draw a card. So unlike Kaalia, very much unlike Kethis, and unlike Kaikar, this card I want to first pick. This card is great in the deck that it wants to be in. It does everything that that deck wants to do. Kaikar flies. That's what it does for the flying deck. Kaalia attacks. That's what she does. Omnath enters the battlefield and deals a bunch of damage if you are heavily into the elementals deck, and then every time you landfall you get to put a counter on whatever elemental you want, and even if you have none, Omnath keeps growing because it's not another target elemental, it is target elemental. And when you start to get a whole bunch of lands and you start flooding, your lands draw you a card, just like Tatyova. Omnath is great. Omnath is a slam dunk first pick despite being 3 colors. I'm going to try to get into green, get me some Gift of Paradises, get me some fixing, and I'm going to go crazy with Omnath. I think Omnath is a solid A. I'm kind of shocked that all the other mythics, except maybe the last one that we'll look at, kind of failed on actually being the leaders of their archetype. Solid A for Omnath. It looks so good. Risen Reef is up next. Risen Reef is 1 green, blue for a creature elemental at uncommon. It's a 1/1. Whenever Risen Reef or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put the card onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. So it's a 3-mana 1/1. Ew. But when it ETBs, it draws you a card. And if it's a land card, which is often not what you want to draw, it just instantly goes to the battlefield instead. You ramp yourself. And as long as Risen Reef sticks around, every other elemental does this too. Risen Reef looks great. As excited I am for the blue-white Flyers deck, I really want to do this full teamer elemental deck. Risen Reef I have as like a B. I think it's a fantastic card. I think it's going to be really good in that archetype. Sky Knight Vanguard is up next. Sky Knight Vanguard is red-white for a creature human knight at uncommon. It's a 1/2 flyer. Whenever Sky Knight Vanguard attacks, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token that's tapped and attacking. I'm not a huge fan of this. I'm not a huge fan. I've gotten burned multiple times in the past for not liking a 2-mana 1/2 flyer that did something. This is a 2-mana 1/2 flyer that does something, but I don't know if this something is good enough. The vast majority of the time, your opponent is going to have something bigger than a 1/1, which means the 1/1 that is created and tapped and attacking is just gonna die. Now, there's some combat tricks in this color, and some can be sort of scary. Infuriate on that 1/1, suddenly making it a 4/3, that's a little bit scary. So despite my reservations on this, I think this is probably going to be okay in an aggro deck because it is still just 1 damage in the air. You can just pretend that that 1/1 doesn't even exist because it's not going to exist a whole bunch of the times. But if you can back it up with a combat trick or something, you may be able to get your opponent very well. So I'm going to fight my instinct on this. My instinct is I want to give this like a C. Or even like maybe a C-, but we're going to pop this up to a C+. These are all minor grade variations, but C+ for Sky Knight Vanguard. Up next is Tomebound Lich. Tomebound Lich is 1 blue-black for a creature zombie wizard at uncommon. It's a 1/3 Death Touch lifelinker. Whenever Tomebound Lich enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. Seems pretty good. It's a 1/3 for 3. Which isn't exciting, but it's a Death Touch lifelinker, which is exciting. That's going to block quite well. Quite well. Looking at a graph of the power and toughness, which is done by a viewer of Travis Sauer's stream named Zombub. See if I can remember to link this in the comments below. The most common and uncommon power is 2. 40 2-power creatures. 29 with 1 power, 27 with 3 power, and then like 11 with 4 and 6 with 5. 2 power is way the most common that you're going to see on the board, which means a 1/3 is going to block really well, especially when it has Death Touch and Lifelink. And when it ETBs you loot, that's just gravy. I don't expect to ever deal damage with this creature. It's never going to be the intention, but if it comes down on 3 and there's no creature in the way on 4, well, may as well attack in and loot. Why not, right? So I think this card's great. I think it's a very strong B-. I'll first pick this card, I'm pretty sure, out of some packs. B- for Tomebound Lich. Up next is our final mythic, Yarok the Desecrated. Yarok the Desecrated is 2 black, green, blue for legendary creature elemental horror at mythic. It's a 3/5 with Death Touch and Lifelink. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That means you're going to double all of your entering the battlefield effects, because that is the creature triggering itself, and anything else such as another elemental entering causing Risen Reef to trigger will also trigger a second time. This is the kind of card that I tend to look at and I just go, that's for somebody else to do. You've got to build around this, obviously. If you're playing it as a 3/5 Death Touch Lifelinker for 5, it's honestly probably still okay. So the floor of this for even me who doesn't like jank and who stays away from jank, is probably still just a C+. If not, maybe even a B-. But if you can successfully build around this, if you can build a whole bunch of enter the battlefield effects into your deck, this is going to get a lot better. My one concern here is this is a 5-drop, and what everybody has to remember, and as much as I say this, they never do, games of limited Magic don't last that long. Might feel like it sometimes, and sure, sometimes you get that 25-turn game of Magic. But War of the Spark, which was a relatively slow format, had an average turn end of turn 10. And I don't really expect this set to be slower than that. I'd expect it to maybe even be a turn or 2 or 3 faster. Which means that you're not actually getting, on average, too many turns to start going crazy with this. Now, you can attempt to build your deck in such a way that you will get the extra turns, that you will make the game go long. You can try to play counter spells and a whole bunch of removal and stuff like that. But yeah, maybe if I open this, I'll dive deep into it and try to break myself of the kill 'em fast kind of plan that I've sort of adopted lately in Limited. Because yeah, don't get me wrong, the power is absolutely here. If you jam in a bunch of ferocious pups and you start getting 2 2/2s off of that 3-drop, or if you start drawing 2 cards off of your Cloudkin Seer, or you loot twice off of Tomebound Lich or whatever, this thing's gonna go nuts. So just to appease everybody, I'll give this a B. But you obviously have to very carefully build around this to make it a B. But like I said, it's a 3/5 Death Touch Lifelink for 5 at a minimum, so C+ at a floor here. So that's going to wrap it up for the gold cards. Now we can move over to the artifacts. There's a relatively largish number. I feel like it's more than there were in M20 or M19, but there can't be, because M19 actually had an artifact deck. Looks like this set has 5 more, but coincidentally there are also 5 colored artifacts in this set. So the set actually has the same number of artifacts as M19 did. Weird. Anyways, up first is Anvil Rot Raptor. Anvil Rot Raptor is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature bird at common. It's a 2/1 flyer with first strike. We saw this in, I want to say, Dominaria, or maybe it was a core set. Or after a quick Scryfall search, apparently it was actually Theros that I last played this card. Yeah, Anvil Rot Raptor is not great. It's overcosted for what it is. It's a 2/1 flyer. We paid 2 mana for that a lot of the time throughout Magic's history. First strike obviously is not something we typically get on a 2/1 flyer, which does make this better, but it doesn't really make it 4 mana better. If you are really desperate for a creature, this can go into your blue-white flyers deck and go into whatever deck you want, but it's obviously going to get more value there. But it's not something you should be actively seeking out. This is like a C-. You should cut it when you can. Up next is Bag of Holding. Bag of Holding is 1 generic mana for an artifact at rare. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. Pay 2, tap, draw a card, then discard a card. Loot. Pay 4, tap, sacrifice Bag of Holding. Return all cards exiled with Bag of Holding to their owner's hand. So at common and uncommon, there's only 3 ways of making yourself discard that is beneficially. Technically, you could mind rot yourself, you could duress your... No, you actually can't duress yourself, that's target opponent. But we're looking at Keldon Raider, Tombbound Lich, and Hard Cover as ways of having looting for you to turn this on if you don't want to pay 2 and tap this to do it. But even if you don't have those, you can pay 2 and tap this to try to start to get this bag going. And then if you get to a point where you want to draw a bunch of cards and maybe you've sculpted it in such a way that those cards are actually going to be really good late game, then you can pay 4, tap, and sack this. I think this card's actually pretty cool, and I'm gonna start playing this, I think, more than I should. And maybe it's my ancient dirtily ways coming back to me here. But I can just see this being a 1-drop that you play, and then every time you have 2 mana, you loot, because you should always loot. And this sort of gets rid of the downside of looting, which there's no downside to looting. But if you have to decide between, do you want this 6-drop that's going to be amazing in 5 turns, or do you want this 2/2, you can throw the 6-drop away. It's going to get put into your bag of holding, and then when the time is right, you can get it and all the other cards back. So I'm going to start a little bit high on bag of holding. I've got it at a B-, which I think may be too high. It may just be that this is too slow, doesn't do enough. It may just be that you're looting normally and you're throwing away lands, and so late in the game you can pay 4, tap, and sack this to draw a bunch of lands. Yeah, so bag of holding, I'm going to start a little bit high at a B- and expect it to go down. Colossus Hammer is up next. Colossus Hammer is 1 generic mana for an artifact equipment at uncommon that gives the equipped creature +10/+10 and loses flying. Its equip cost happens to be 8 mana. That's a whole lot of mana. That's a whole lot of mana, which it needs to be, because otherwise this hammer would be horrifyingly scary. So, do you remember what we just talked about with Yarok just a couple of cards ago? Games of limited magic end way sooner than you think they do. Getting to a point in the game where you have 8 mana is not something that happens most of the time. And so I'm giving Colossus Hammer an F. Like, you cannot assume that you're going to get to 8 mana and equip this. And the fact that it makes your flyer, which would be the perfect thing to put this on, no longer fly, is really, really bad as well. As I mentioned back in the blue set review, if you want to do some stupid stuff and tilt some people off, get yourself 2 renowned weaponsmiths, which is already unlikely to do. Play this, equip it for 6 mana, 4 mana, and win the game. Probably like once out of your 3 rounds. This card's bad. You're going to learn why it's bad if you put this into your deck. It's an F. F for Colossus Hammer. Up next is Diamond Knight. Diamond Knight is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature, Knight at uncommon. It's a 1/1 with Vigilance. As Diamond Knight enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen color, put a +1/+1 counter on Diamond Knight. So it's just like Diamond Mare. In fact, it's the same background. Does this form a panorama with Diamond Mare? In checking Diamond Mare, it actually looks like it could form a panorama if there was a card in between. So maybe next year we'll get Diamond something. Anyways, I'm not a huge fan of this, but for saying that, I'm probably going to die to a 12/12 version of this or something. I'm not okay with this until it's a 3/3, so I need to pay 3 for this, cast 2 spells of the correct color before I'm even okay with this. That's not a card that I play. That's just not a card that I play. Obviously, you choose the color based on the spells in your hand so that you really hopefully should be able to get this to a 3/3 in a few turns, but we're talking about getting to a 3/3 on like turn 5, maybe 4 if we're lucky. There's a lot of work that goes into this. I'm not sold. I'm not sold. I'm going to have to be proven wrong on this because I'm going to start this at a C-. I'm going to cut this the vast, vast, vast majority of the time. In fact, I think it might even be a little bit closer to a D+. Way too much work, and when it does start to get scary, well, that's when all of the cheap common removal that this format has comes for this guy. Up next is Diviner's Lockbox. Diviner's Lockbox is 4 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 1, tap. Choose a card name, then reveal the top card of your library. If that card has the chosen name, sacrifice Diviner's Lockbox and draw 3 cards. Activate this ability only any time you could cast a sorcery. This card is trash. It's absolute trash. It's 4 mana for an artifact that does nothing until you put some more mana into it. And what it does is reveal the top card of your library and probably not draw it. You can up your chances of being able to actually go off with this by naming a land, because that's most likely to be the card that's on top of your library, because there's more copies of them in your library. But if you do, then you draw 3 cards, one of which you know is a land, which is probably not very exciting on turn 5 at a minimum, because you can only activate this as a sorcery. Yeah, this card's awful. It's an F. It's an absolute F. You should never, ever, ever, ever play this card. There is no reason that I can see to play this card. Up next is Golos Tireless Pilgrim. Golos Tireless Pilgrim is 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact creature scout at rare. It's a 3/5. When Golos Tireless Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Pay 2 white, blue, black, red, green. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana costs. No. Not for me. 5 mana 3/5s are not where I want to be. 5 mana 3/5s that ramp me on turn 5 or later are not where I want to be, and I'm not playing a 5-color deck for this Pilgrim. Nope, just not gonna happen. This is like a D-. You can play a 3/5 for 5 if you want. You can leave your friends behind. D- for Golos Tireless Pilgrim. I just feel like I can get better cards. Up next is Grafdigger's Cage. Grafdigger's Cage is 1 generic mana for an artifact at rare. Creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. This is like a D-. This is sideboard only, and I'm not even positive what you sideboard this in against. Maybe against somebody who's playing Blood for Bones or something, because then they can't reanimate that creature. They still get to draw the other one, I guess, but yeah, this is a D-, and you'll probably just never, ever, ever side this in. It doesn't do what you want to be doing in Limited. It is purely a reprint for modern purposes, and probably other formats people will yell at me in the comments for that I'm not aware of. Heartpiercer Bow is up next. Heartpiercer Bow is 2 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Whenever equipped creature attacks, Heartpiercer Bow deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. Equip cost of 1. F. This card is bad. This card is super, super, super bad. You are playing a 2 mana artifact that doesn't do anything until you equip it, and what it does is it deals 1 damage to a creature before blocks. So your 2/2 doesn't even get to guaranteed kill their 3/3 that you deal a damage to, because they know that it has had a damage dealt to it, and they can choose to block with something else, which means you wasted the entire effect of this card. I guess I can walk back the F a little bit, because there are specific narrow build-arounds that you can do. You can attach this to a creature when you have Ogre Siegebreaker, and then you attack with your creature, and you ping the creature you want to die, and you pay 4 mana, and it kills it, and then the creature that you attacked with probably dies because it was just a sacrificial creature. And we've put so much work into attempting to make this card good, I don't see why I can't just give this an F. Because what happens if you don't draw your Ogre Siegebreaker? What happens if the board state isn't correct? What happens is you have a do-nothing card. F for Heartpiercer Bow. Up next is Icon of Ancestry. Icon of Ancestry is 3 generic mana for an artifact at rare. As Icon of Ancestry enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Pay 3 generic mana, tap it, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card of the chosen type from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You obviously have to build around this, and this is something that I'd have to put a lot of math into to figure out. But I assume you'd probably be picking human, goblin, elemental, actually, is probably going to be one of the best cards for this. In fact, this just jams into your elemental deck. I just did a quick bit of scryfalling. There's 22 elementals in the set. At common or uncommon, there are 21 humans. There's only 7 goblins, 4 elves. If you're looking for class types, there's only 5 warriors and 6 soldiers. So there's not too much that you can do with this. But if you are elementals, if you are black-white, which has a large number of humans in it, white especially is very human-y, then I think this card's going to be pretty darn good. You obviously have to pick this and build around it. So it's tricky. It's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah, so if you pick this, know what you're doing. And if you successfully do what you're going to do, it's going to be very good. And paying 3 to tap and look at the top 3 cards and try to find one of those creature types is going to be great as well. You could even play this, I think, a little bit lower than you would. So you could play this with a lower creature type because you still get to dig through for it. So it's not like you have to hope that you're top decking a creature of that type every turn to get bigger. So I don't know. This is it's a super hard card to grade. It's basically build around, and in the right deck it's a B, and if you whiff it's way lower. So build around B, we'll say, for Icon of Ancestry. Up next is Manifold Key. Manifold Key is 1 generic mana for an artifact dead uncommon. Pay 1, tap it, untap another target artifact. Pay 3, tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. Obviously untapping an artifact creature could be decent. You could get real annoying and pair this up with something like Steel Overseer that we'll see in a little bit. But there's not a ton that you're really getting there by untapping an artifact. That reads as something for another format. Paying 3 to tap it and making a creature unable to be blocked this turn, well, that's not awful. That's obviously like Suspicious Bookcase or like Rogue's Passage. But Rogue's Passage was a land and tapped for mana, and Suspicious Bookcase was a creature that blocked. This doesn't do any of those things. So I think this probably just isn't good enough. I've got this at like a D plus, maybe a D. Obviously, if you have Steel Overseer and you have a bunch of artifacts and everything aligns perfectly, sure. But in reality, where I live, most of the time at least, we're going to give this a D. D for Manifold Key. Marauder's Axe is up next. Marauder's Axe is 2 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Equip cost of 2. We saw this in M19, I think. Pretty sure it was M19 that we saw this. It's an equipment. It's not Bone Splitter, but sometimes you just have to be a dumb aggro deck and play this. It's super cuttable, like a C-. Goes a little bit better in like the aggro Flyers deck because a Flyer holds this well, but you can probably get more consistent damage just by playing more creatures. C-, very cuttable for Marauder's Axe. Up next is Meteor Golem. Meteor Golem is 7 generic mana for an artifact creature golem at uncommon. It's only a 3/3, but when it ETBs, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. We had this in M19 as well. I'm pretty sure this was in M19. Was it Origins? No, it had to be M19. Anyways, yeah, this is good, but expensive. It's 7 mana for kill something and have a 3/3 left behind, which is not bad. The trick, of course, is that there are a ton of decks that you just absolutely can't play this. You can't play this in your red-white low-curve aggro deck, or in your blue-red relatively low-curve tempo deck, or etc. But in your green deck, where you've got a Leafkin Druid and maybe a Gift of Paradise and some ramp, well then, this looks a whole lot better. So make sure you know where to play this, and it's going to be good. It's going to be like a B-, C+. We'll go with B-, I suppose. But in other decks, you've got to be a responsible adult and cut it when it does not fit your curve or your game plan. Mystic Forge is up next. Mystic Forge is 4 generic mana for an artifact at rare. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card, which doesn't exist in this format. Tap, pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library. I really don't care about this. So, as we talked about, there's a lot of artifacts in this set. There's 5 more than there were in M19. But as I think we're seeing in this set review, they're not great. There's a lot of Fs, there's a lot of cut them if you can, there's a lot of build arounds. And so I don't think you're ever really casting many cards off the top with this. And if you're paying 4 mana and a life to kind of scry, well, that's not really worth it either. I really like scrying every turn, don't get me wrong. but I like that when it's on a creature or something like that, not on a 4-mana artifact, and I'm paying a life for the privilege. So this is just an F. I don't think you should ever play Mystic Forge. Up next is Pattern Matcher. Pattern Matcher is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature golem at uncommon. It's a 3/3. When Pattern Matcher enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card with the same name as another creature you control. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is interesting. It reads like one of those cards that just isn't going to do anything. It's a hill giant. It's a 4-mana 3/3, so we're looking at like a C- as the floor. It's a card that you can put into your deck, but you should probably cut. Now, if you have cards that have the same name, if you have multiple copies of things, this obviously gets better. Gets better, of course, with the Catch-em-alls, with the Undead Servants and the Fairy Miscreants and the Pack Mastiffs and etc. But you got to get them. You got to get those. So be careful, I guess. I don't know where to pick this. I feel like this is just one of those cards where you hope you get rewarded. You don't take this pack 1. You take this pack 3 when you already have picked up a few of those Pokemon Collectimals, or when you've picked up multiple of whatever random common creature you're a fan of. The downside here, of course, and I think it's a big enough downside to just keep this at a C- regardless, is you have to have drawn and played that other creature first before you play this, and not have drawn the matching creature. So I think there's a little bit too much going on here that is going to keep this at the C-, cut it whenever you can. It's just a hill giant too much of the time grade, but sometimes it will play better. But C- for Pattern Matcher. Up next is Prismite. Prismite is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature golem at common. It's a 2/1, pay 2, add 1 mana of any color. We literally just saw this in War of the Spark. It's back here. If you're desperate for color fixing, here you go. It's a piker, so it's not horrifying, but it kind of is. Pikers aren't great these days. So this is like a C-, and I don't think it's much higher generally ever. Retributive Wand is up next. Retributive Wand is 3 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 3, tap it. Retributive? Retributive. This wand deals 1 damage to any target. When this wand is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to any target. Big nope. Big nope. 3 mana, 6 mana to deal 1 damage to any target is not where I want to be. The fact that you can't do this multiple times, maybe if you play a key and pay 4 mana every time. Yeah, no, there's way too little going on here. And hey, if my opponent kills it, they take 5 damage, but they're not going to kill it, and they shouldn't be able to kill it because you shouldn't be playing it. I think this is another F. It's just not going to do enough of anything. F for this wand. Salvager of Ruin is up next. Salvager of Ruin is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature constructed on uncommon. It's a 2/1. Sacrifice Salvager of Ruin. Choose target permanent card in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn. Return it to your hand. This is not very good. We just talked about how pikers are not very good these days and are kind of a C-, and that grade maybe even should be ratcheted down a little bit. Pikers that cost 3 mana? Well, it's even worse. The fact that this only gets back something that went to the graveyard this turn is really rough, because this is on board, and your opponent typically is the one who decides when your permanents go to the graveyard, so they're not going to let you, unless they have to, get value off of this. Now, I guess technically you could use this as an even worse brought back. You could just save this in your hand until something dies on your turn, because you'd have to be able to cast this for 3 and immediately sack it and bring whatever that was back. But yeah, I'm super out on this. It's like a D-. You can play a 2/1 for 3 if you want, I guess. D- for Salvager of Ruin. Scuttlemutt is up next. Scuttlemutt is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature Scarecrow at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Tap, target creature becomes the color or colors of your choice until end of turn. This isn't great. This is a worse Mana Geode from War of the Spark, or was Manalith in M19? Pretty sure it was. It's a worse Manalith because it dies to shock into a lot of things. So if your opponent sees you play this, and you're probably playing this to fix your mana, and they say, well, screw your splash and they kill this, well, that's a pretty big problem. Whereas they couldn't do that with Manalith. They weren't main decking Artifact Destruction and using it on your fixing. So I'm not super sold on this. I think Leafkin Druid is just a significantly better mana dork than Scuttlemutt is. 3 mana is where your mana dorks start to fall off a fair bit. 1 mana, of course, is amazing. 2 mana is pretty darn good. 3 mana, less good. And the second ability, yes, I know you could play all of those protection from cards, or you could play all of the color hosers in your main deck and play this, and if you draw them in the perfect order, you get to use them as real removal, but that's way too janky for me. That is not something that I'm going to consider for this card. So this card's like a D for me. Maybe a D+, because sometimes you just have to get that fixing, and you better hope that this works. But do not play this and no basics of the color that you're splashing, because they will kill this and you will be kind of screwed. So D for Scuttlemutt. Up next is Steel Overseer. Steel Overseer is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at rare. It's a 1/1. Tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. All those artifact creatures that I gave an F to, if you get a Steel Overseer, fine. Play your Prismites, play your Scuttlemattes, play your Salvager of Ruins, and it's gonna be pretty good. As always, there's the trick of you have to draw and play the Steel Overseer. Because if your board is nothing but 3 mana 2/1s and 2 mana 2/1s, you might not do too well. But when Steel Overseer comes down and those things get a counter or 2 or 7 on them, then things are going a little bit out of control. And the upside, of course, is you can just play Steel Overseer. It doesn't say other artifact creature, so every turn you tap this and it becomes a 2/2, a 3/3, a 4/4, a 5/5. We had that card at some point. I don't remember what it was called though. But yeah, you just kind of, it was like a clockwork thing. You wind it up every turn and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until suddenly you're tapping to attack with it instead of tapping to put a counter on it. So Steel Overseer by itself is very, very, very good. So good, in fact, that I don't even think I would do the whole artifact creature thing. I wouldn't try to go off with this. I would play the playable artifact creatures, which looking back, I don't think I actually gave a playable grade to any of them. But I would play the Diamond Knight, and I would play... I would put in a Prismite to see if I could go off with this, and a Scuttlemutt, why not? But I think Steel Overseer is good enough on its own that this can just be like a B? Maybe a B- because it takes some time. It takes a lot of time. But we'll go with a B- on Steel Overseer. Keep in mind, it's just good on its own. It's just good on its own. You don't have to go off with this. You don't have to worsen your deck, because if you worsen your deck and you don't draw the Overseer, or they deal with the Overseer, then you just have a bad deck. So be careful, but a B- for Steel Overseer. Our second last artifact is Stone Golem, a 5 mana artifact creature golem at common. It's a 4/4 with flavor text. Not a fan. 5 mana is just way too expensive for a vanilla 4/4. My 5 mana cards need to do something, and this doesn't do much of anything. If you are absolutely horribly desperate for a creature, sure, but you should cut this a lot. You shouldn't cut this. You shouldn't play this. This should be something that you pull in from the sideboard when you find yourself only having 22 playables. So D for Stone Golem. Our final artifact is Vial of Dragonfire. Vial of Dragonfire is 2 generic mana for a artifact at common. Pay 2 generic mana, tap it, sacrifice Vial of Dragonfire. It deals 2 damage to target creature. So last set we had Explosive Apparatus, which was this card, except it cost 1 and 3 to activate as opposed to 2 and 2. And this card was okay. Explosive Apparatus was okay in M19, and Vial of Dragonfire was okay in Theros. And you can even search this up off of your Renowned Weaponsmith. It doesn't make Renowned Weaponsmith that much better for this, though. Keep in mind that it is an onboard trick, so your opponent's probably not going to play their high-value X2s while you have this sitting on the board, but you also have the option later in the game of just paying 4 mana to play and activate, all in one kind of go, and it's sort of a surprise expensive shock. It's a fine card. It's kind of in like the C range. You play it or you don't play it. I don't think you look to super actively cut this, but you certainly don't look to super actively play it either. So just a C for Vial of Dragonfire. So that's going to lead us into lands. There aren't too many to talk about because up first we have Bloodfell Caves, Blossoming Sands, Dismal Backwater, Jungle Hollow, Rugged Highlands, Scoured Barrens, Saltwater Cliffs, what else do we got here? Thornwood Falls, Tranquil Cove, and Windscarred Crag. All 10 of these lands say, Thornwood Falls for example, enters the battlefield tapped. They all gain you 1 life when they enter the battlefield, and they all tap for the 2 colors that they tap for. Now, gigantic warning, because I see a lot of people looking at the spoiler, looking at the preview and saying, aha, there's so much fixing, there's so many dual lands. It's the same as M19. These dual lands appear in your basic land slot sometimes. And I can't actually find that number anywhere. I've been desperately searching for this number. This is Future John after one last desperate search, and I found the number. 5 out of 12 packs, your basic will be a dual land or Evolving Wilds, which is the same in M20 as it was in M19, except there were 10 duels in M19, whereas there's 10 duels plus Evolving Wilds in M20. So that means that in an average draft, there are only 10 dual lands in the entire draft, and if there's one that you're looking for, then that's a 1 in 11 chance multiplied by a 5 by 12 chance, which means there is 0.9 copies of any given dual land or Evolving Wilds in the average draft. Stats being stats, you could of course have 20 of the same duel in one draft. It's only going to happen 1 in a million times, but could happen. So these lands are great if you need to splash for a 3rd color, but this is not, despite the articles, despite the 3-color draft themes, this is not a 3-color set. Because these duels are not at common. They're not showing up at the same rate as commons. They're actually showing up at basically exactly the same rate as an uncommon. An uncommon is 0.9 per draft, and any one of these duels is 0.9 per draft. So you can't just expect to have perfect mana with all of these duels, even though they have the common set rarity symbol on them. So just keep that in mind. But these lands are solid, like I said, if you need to fix, if you are doing 3 colors, which I don't recommend. And even in a 2-color deck, if you get the perfect on-color duel, that's pretty darn good as well. The fact that they gain life is a nice little bonus. This was always good in Khans and Fate and Dragons of Tarkir. But yeah, these are like a C, but the grade's kind of meaningless on here. You know when you want one and you know when you don't. So C for these 10 lands. Up next is Cryptic Caves. Cryptic Caves is a land at uncommon. Tap it to add colorless mana. Pay 1 generic, tap it, sack it, draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. This isn't horrible. This isn't horrible late in the game when you have more than 5 lands. You can pay 1, tap it, and draw a card, and sack it, of course. And that's fine. It's not awful, but it is a colorless land in a set that has a lot of 3-pipped cards, 3 color pips like green, 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 and even a number of green, green, for example. So I don't know how often I want to hurt my mana base just for the chance later in the game, if it matters or we get there, to draw a card. So this is like a C- or even a D+ for me. It's just not a card that I'm super looking to get into my deck. Up next is Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds is a land at common, but not. Tap it, sack it, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Evolving Wilds is great if you're fixing. It's a great card to have in a set, and unfortunately they put it into that special basic land slot, like I was saying, with the 10 dual lands. That means that an average draft only has 0.9 copies of Evolving Wilds, so you cannot expect to get one of these, because you have 8 people competing for generally 1. But if you are the one that gets this, it's going to be pretty handy. It's going to really help your mana. It's going to help that splash be even more consistent. It's a C when you need it, but you don't really play this in a deck that doesn't need that 3rd color. Up next is Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead is a land at rare. Field of the Dead enters the battlefield tapped. Tap it to add a colorless mana. Whenever Field of Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This is an F. There's no reason to play this. There's no reason to hurt your mana base. You're probably not going to have 7 different land names. You're going to have Forest and Island and Field of the Dead, and then maybe a duel and maybe another dual, and we're still 2 lands short of getting a 2/2. F. Just the hardest of Fs. Up next is Lotus Field. Lotus Field is a land at rare with hexproof. Lotus Field enters the battlefield tapped. Tap to add 3 mana of any one color. It's a black Lotus land with hexproof. Also, when Lotus Field enters the battlefield, sacrifice 2 lands. This thing's garbage. Sure, probably in constructed command or whatever, people are, I think, salivating over this. I'm not sure. I've seen some excitement, but in limited, this is awful. So turn 3, I play a 2-drop, and then I play this land, and I sacrifice my 2 lands, and I have this on the battlefield, and then turn 4, I untap, and I play my land, and aha, I have 4 mana. One of them can tap for 3 of the same mana, but that's not good enough. And this was all for the low cost of having a land that I cannot play before turn 3. Meaning if I open a hand that is land Lotus Field, I'm screwed. Yeah, no, this is an F. This is a hard F. You should never have this in your deck. F for Lotus Field. And this has been a long video. I thought this was going to be a bit of a short one. We have 5 remaining lands, and they're all the same. They are the temples from, I think, Journey into Nyx, I think is where these 5 came from. Temple of Epiphany, Temple of Malady, Temple of Mystery, Temple of Silence, and Temple of Triumph. All of these enter the battlefield tapped. All of these are rare. All of them, when they enter the battlefield, you scry 1, and they all are dual lands of their color pair. Blue-red, black-green, green-blue, and white-black, and red-white. These are fine. These are better than the gain lands, for sure. So much so, in fact, that when I was playing Theros and Born and Journey into Nyx, I actually played these in off-color decks. So if I was red-blue, I would play the red-white one. Because a Scryland, that was a cool bit of value, and it helped me splash a little bit. It wasn't an amazing play, and it didn't mean that I picked these super highly. But these are like a C+, I guess, if the gain lands are Cs. You'll play these if you need them, play them if you need a splash, and I don't hate playing them if I am one of the 2 colors either. So C+ for the temples. So that's going to wrap it up for the M20 set review. This video took a long time. There must have been way more cards than I expected. I thought this would go a little bit faster. Anyways, let me know what you are excited about in the set as a whole. I'm looking to get back to a lot of top 10 lists this time around. I'm looking to get back to the set schedule of top 10 mythics and rares that I want to open, top 10 art, top 10 flavor text, top 10 of the set, to get those videos going again, because they were always fun to edit and script and get out, and I might be able to have enough time to get them out on a regular schedule again. So let me know what you want to see for those videos as well, specific to M20. Remember, of course, that tomorrow, July 1st, Canada Day, I will be streaming Core Set 20 sealed for most of the day, starting at, I think, 1 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time. Come by twitch.tv/TheManaLeak sometime during the day/evening, and you should see me there streaming Core Set 20 sealed. Thank you very much to WotC for inviting me to that early access event once again. And for anybody who wants to play Core Set 2020, it comes out the next day on Arena, and next weekend on or in paper. I'll be attending pre-release as usual with a pre-release weekend vlog and all that jazz, so stay tuned for all of that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over at twitch.tv/TheManaLeak, Facebook, and Twitter, that's what we usually say next. Patreon.com/TheManaLeak is where you can go to help out the channel financially. My patrons are the best. They keep this channel going for sure. You can go over to inkedgaming.com, use the promo code ManaLeak10, all one word, 10 is the number, to get 10% off your order and help out the channel. The easiest way to help out that channel, the quickest, click the thumbs up, click subscribe, and share this if you enjoy it and you want the channel to grow. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all later.